So I used to live in Miami, and while I still love visiting, I made the decision to move to the Fort Lauderdale area, and it was one of the best lifestyle decisions I've ever made for myself. If you're trying to decide between Miami and Fort Lauderdale, or you're wondering if Fort Lauderdale is just a smaller version of Miami, make sure you stay in the video and watch it all the way through. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly why I made the move and why so many others are doing the same. So I want to tell you a little bit about myself and why I had that experience of kind of moving between these two cities. So I was essentially born and raised in Miami, and I lived in Miami pretty much almost my entire adult life. We did move up to New Jersey when I was about 9 years old, but we moved back down when I was about 15. So my complete experience in most of my childhood and also most of my adult life has been pretty much in Miami. So I know it really well. I've seen it through the years. I've seen it kind of grow up from, kind of the 80s cocaine cowboys era into kind of like the 90s fashion model era into what it is in terms of modern day era for Miami. And I've seen lots of different changes and have loved a lot of the changes and some of the changes not so much. I will say that before kind of moving to Fort Lauderdale this one final last time, which was back in 2021, I did have some experience living in Wilton Manors back in 2009 all the way through 2016. And then for personal reasons, I actually ended up moving back to Miami. So I currently do live here actually in Oakland Park, which is a city right next to Fort Lauderdale, and have been here since 2021. And although I do love Miami, there was definitely some very specific reasons why we ended up moving. A lot of them make a lot of sense. And there's a lot of reasons that it would be a good idea to move to Miami, but there's also a lot of reasons why it's a great idea to move to Fort Lauderdale. And we're going to talk about a lot of that today. As I mentioned, I have lived in Miami pretty much almost my entire life. So I've really seen it go through a lot of changes. And although a lot of the changes were really exciting, it started to become a bit much, even for my realtor life. And I still do business in Miami and I sell in Miami, but it started to become kind of a little bit crazy. You've had this really huge population growth in Miami. It has really grown exponentially, especially since the year 2000. So it can feel really, really congested. And it's not only traffic, it's just kind of, there's just people everywhere. And it's not even a particular neighborhood, although I do have to say that you can ultimately feel the congestion the highest in specific areas like downtown Miami, Wynwood, Midtown, Edgewater, which are kind of the downtown core, and certainly over on Miami Beach. You can even feel it in some of the suburbs. I lived in Miami Shores. You can kind of feel the congestion there. Kind of makes life a little heavier, especially if you're in kind of a rush and you have a lot to do. Miami sometimes will have a different rule for you in terms of what you think your day is going to end up going like. So what you thought originally was going a day that maybe a particular task was only going to take like 30 minutes, all of a sudden becomes like 2 hours. And I'm not even kidding. So it's a type of thing that you generally may not want to participate all the time in, kind of letting things or allowing things to be much longer than you originally anticipated. So that's something that you really have to think about in terms of like deciding between Miami and Fort Lauderdale. So the Miami growth has been really incredible, but it really has kind of pushed me to make my decision to move to Fort Lauderdale. If this is your first time on the channel and you want to know everything about living in Fort Lauderdale, Florida and the surrounding cities, then subscribe below so you can be the first to know about our current market in Fort Lauderdale. My name is Hector Valdez. I'm born, raised, and have lived in South Florida my entire life. My team and I love helping people make their move to Fort Lauderdale, whether it's 9 days or 9 months. Feel free to reach out. Our contact information is in the description, and we'd be happy to help you make a smooth move to Fort Lauderdale. So I would like to talk a little bit more in depth about the traffic. As I mentioned, the city's grown exponentially in terms of population, in terms of buildings, and the traffic has become next level crazy. And it's really just kind of across the board. Obviously, we have a lot of congestion on I-95, even through Broward, but in Miami, it kind of takes it's a whole different animal. And even some of the roads like Biscayne Boulevard, US 1, South Dixie Highway, going through Coconut Grove and the Gables down into Pinecrest, the Palmetto, the Dolphin Expressway, all those highways are highly, highly, highly congested. So like I said, doing anything in general will get you really stuck in a lot of traffic. If you're gonna, go over and kind of run an errand and you have to go to downtown, it just becomes drudgery. You're stuck in a lot of traffic. I always say to people jokingly, but it's absolutely true, the worst traffic in all of South Florida has to be on Biscayne Boulevard in Aventura. It's been the worst I have seen in almost any neighborhood. And it's probably because of the density of the amount of buildings and the lack of public transportation. Conversely, when you look at Fort Lauderdale, obviously we have traffic as well. We have I-95 that goes through most of Broward, but the traffic is a lot less in some of the feeder roads and some of the main roads in town. For example, taking Andrews Avenue, some of those will have traffic sometimes, but they're not as congested. Or if you take the 595 going out towards the suburb at 5 o'clock, of course you're gonna have traffic, but it's less intense. So if you're local, and even if you're in Pompano and Fort Lauderdale and Hollywood, and you just need to go run an errand, you're not gonna get stuck in crazy, crazy traffic all the time. There are some times during the day where the traffic is gonna be the highest, but you're just not gonna find that intense level of traffic that you're gonna find in Miami. So if you need to, like, for example, go run to the supermarket to go grab, some coffee and some creamer, often happens to me because I'm a huge coffee drinker. Or if you want to go pick something up for dinner, it's something that my husband does all the time. He just kind of runs over to Publix real quick. It's easy here. You can just get in your car, you drive down, it's maybe a 10-minute drive, you go into Publix, and it's really easy. That's the other thing too. Even something as simple as going to Publix or going to a supermarket, wherever supermarket you use in South Florida, could be Milam's in Miami. Getting in and out is just so much easier. So you're not gonna deal with these crazy long lines that you deal with in Miami, or if you have to go to a CVS or a Walgreens to pick up a prescription. Again, just so much easier to get around town. I actually just ran an errand before taking this video where I had to go pick up medicine from a vet. And then I went to go pick up my contacts, which were in order. And all of that took maybe about, 30 minutes. It really was quite easy to kind of get around. So those things, you have to think about those things when you move somewhere. How am I gonna be able to get around? And Miami offers a lot of excitement, but it offers with a lot of inconvenience with regards to traffic. So that was really one of my top reasons, in addition to some other things I'm gonna talk about, was, the reason for moving to Fort Lauderdale was just to avoid all that crazy traffic all the time, which is preventing me doing just the simplest of things. Another reason I moved to the Fort Lauderdale area, like I said, I live in Oakland Park, was really for a better quality of life and a better balance of the things that I personally like. So I love Miami, but Miami can feel a little crazy, a little high end, which is great because I love luxury and I love selling luxury properties. But at the core level, that didn't really kind of match with my life. So I like Fort Lauderdale's more casual appeal in terms of being able to go out and enjoy a beautiful restaurant. The one thing I found with the restaurants in Miami is most of them were super, super high end and super expensive, or you had kind of fast food. So there was kind of no in the middle, at least where I lived in Miami Shores. My husband used to say all the time, it felt like a food desert, and I find that to be pretty true. Versus kind of living in the Oakland Park, Fort Lauderdale, Wilton Manors area, I just find restaurants to be a little bit more appealing and a little bit easier to get to. It happens all the time. On a Monday night, we'll decide, let's just go out to dinner. And there's just like a lot of nice casual restaurants to choose from, where we've become a little bit more like kind of foodie oriented since living here, because the restaurants are just easier to get to. If we want something more high-end, we can go to Las Olas, which is not far away at all, and kind of enjoy that experience. And although Miami offers unique experiences when it comes to restaurants, not exactly super attainable on a daily basis. Whereas in Fort Lauderdale, we can pretty comfortably go out to dinner about 3 to 4 nights a week without breaking the bank, because everything is more moderately priced. Although there are some parts of Miami that are certainly walkable, we have actually found our neighborhoods to be a little bit more walkable. So in Miami, I would generally say that if you live in Miami Beach, or kind of what I call the downtown core, which is kind of Brickell, downtown, Edgewater, Midtown, those areas can be pretty walkable. But if you live in a place like Miami Shores, or if you live in Coral Gables, you're not gonna have that same walkability, and then it becomes that issue of like having to get in your car, and people drive crazy in Miami, so it's not always super safe. Now, don't get me wrong, Fort Lauderdale can definitely feel very suburban, but there's definitely some good walkability here. We personally love to walk on Wilton Drive. It's the big LGBTQ plus area, and we do it quite a bit. So we'll go to dinner on the drive, and then we'll go for a walk, and we really enjoy that. We run into our friends, again, kind of talking about lifestyle. A lot of our friends are up here, so we always kind of like run into people, and we just really enjoy it. It's something really unique and special that I really enjoy. And I think you have that in Miami. I used to feel that a lot actually on Lincoln Road. I couldn't walk on Lincoln Road without running into a friend. It just has changed for me over the last couple of years, as I've felt actually the migration of people that I knew in Miami have now moved up to Fort Lauderdale for very similar reasons why we moved up here. So, and you know, you have other areas that are also very walkable, like for example, Las Olas in downtown Fort Lauderdale is a beautiful boulevard with lots of restaurants, and you can really just enjoy the walk. And it's something that's kind of like unique and special, and it's a little bit easier to get to than some of the urban areas in Miami, at least we have found. Even going to the beach is so much simpler in Fort Lauderdale than in Miami. Again, Miami is truly something special, because when you go to Miami Beach, it's extremely urban, the beaches are beautiful, there's definitely a lot of excitement. But in Fort Lauderdale, it's a little easier to get parked. It's a little easier to drive through. So the one interesting dynamic about Miami Beach is that actually it's quite a distance from the mainland. So if you live in one of the suburban areas, or even if you live in downtown, it's gonna be a solid like 15-minute drive to get over to the beach, and then another 5 to 10 minutes to get over to where the ocean is, because you have Miami Beach and you have traffic. So it becomes like kind of like, I don't want to say an ordeal, but it becomes more of a trip. So I tend to find that people tend to do it a little bit less, because you kind of have to like plan for it. And my mom has always said for years, like, the people of Miami do not go to the beach in Miami, which I find so interesting, because I sometimes feel like that's part of the reason for living in South Florida is the beach. But she's pretty accurate. Most of my friends and people that I knew, they would go there, but it would be more of like a trip that they would have to essentially plan out. It's different in Fort Lauderdale. The beach is only 10 minutes away from my house, and for most places, if you're on the east side of town, obviously if you live in the western suburbs, it's gonna be more of a trek of like probably like 30 to 35 minutes. But if you live on the east side of town in Pompano, even in Hollywood, it's gonna be a little bit easier of a commute to get over to the beach. So you get over, parking's gonna be generally a lot easier than in Miami Beach. And then because the beach areas of Broward County are kind of like in a very narrow strip, you can kind of cross the causeway and then boom, you're on the beach. It's a lot easier, and it's, like I said, it's easier to park. And the beaches in Fort Lauderdale are absolutely beautiful. The water is a little bit more shallow, at least on Fort Lauderdale Beach. You can see little fish, which is really cute. They kind of nip at your ankles sometimes, but it's really lovely and I absolutely love it. And although I do love Miami Beach, I just find that going to the beaches in Broward tends to be a little bit easier and more attainable. So although lifestyle was one of the big reasons why I moved, there was actually something that was even bigger that was a reason why I really wanted to move from Miami into Broward County, into the Fort Lauderdale area. And that number one reason is really housing. So real estate. So the differences in prices between Miami-Dade County and Broward County are staggering. I mean, it is quite a huge jump. And I'm going to give you some examples. So there's going to be a huge notable difference between obviously the neighborhoods in Miami versus the neighborhoods in Fort Lauderdale. Both areas have very expensive, luxurious areas, and both areas probably have more attainable price points. But Fort Lauderdale in general is much more attainable than Miami. I know that there's some neighborhoods in Miami Shores where just entry level, you're starting at $1 million, and that is not the case in Fort Lauderdale. In Fort Lauderdale, you can get into a decent house in the mid 400,000 range, going up to about 6 and 7, and end up in a really decent house. 2-bedroom, 1 bath, a 3-bedroom, 2 bath, maybe not with a pool. Maybe by the time you start getting into the 700s, you're gonna have a pool, etc. Miami is a whole different animal. Even kind of being out in the suburbs, you're kind of pushing into the $800,000, $900,000 range for a really fairly decent home. So that's a lot of money to pay. And that's not even saying like you're gonna be on the east side of town. In Fort Lauderdale, Wilton Manors, Oakland Park, you can still be on the east side of town, not pay a lot of money, and still have access to everything that would be considered like downtown living in terms of going to Wilton Drive, going to Las Olas, going over to the beach. And it's just much more attainable in terms of like the prices you're gonna be paying. So you're gonna get a little bit more bang for your buck, actually quite a bit more bang for your buck in general living up in Broward. Now in the suburbs, it's kind of a very similar thing. The homes in the suburbs of Broward are definitely much more attainable. If you go to look for a home in places like Miramar, it's gonna be a little bit of an easier entry-level price point versus looking at something like Doral in Miami or some of the suburbs out in Kendall. And then, you know, the problem with Kendall is that you're just, again, going back to traffic and congestion, you're just so far out. So you might get something that's more attainable, but it's just so much harder to get in if you work in downtown Miami. Now, if you live in the suburbs of Broward, like for example, if you live in Davie, if you live in Weston, even Parkland to a certain extent, even though it's further out, you're gonna have a pretty easy-ish commute to downtown Fort Lauderdale. So that's where you kind of differ. If you're in Kendall and you have to drive to downtown Miami, that commute could very easily take an hour and a half because the traffic is so intense in Miami and there's just so much traffic the majority of the time. The other big thing about real estate between Miami and Fort Lauderdale is that in Fort Lauderdale, you're gonna get a plethora of waterfront options. That is the reason they call it the Venice of America, because there's so much water frontage in terms of single family homes. You can really almost, and you know, the entry level price point for a waterfront home in Fort Lauderdale is definitely probably starting at $1 million or a little bit less. You cannot find that in Miami and have a boat. Like, it just does not exist. It's really much more difficult. The homes are very, very high end and they're well into the millions. And there might be 1 or 2 pop up here and there, but they're not going to be anywhere that's going to be convenient. But in Fort Lauderdale, you're going to have, again, a plethora of options. You're going to have Fort Lauderdale, there's tons of neighborhoods. There's all kinds of different water access. If you wanted to have a small boat and you're okay with fixed bridges, again, entry level. Then you're gonna have a little bit more expensive if you have no fixed bridges, if you want a larger boat. And then even going up to Pompano. Pompano has a ton, kind of like the next option beyond Fort Lauderdale, a lot of waterfront homes and lots of neighborhoods that offer waterfront homes. So you're not gonna find that in Miami. So that's like a huge plus in terms of real estate if you're a boater that you're just not gonna get in Miami. And I would say that that is very helpful, and it's kind of great if you're a boater. So another reason that I moved to Fort Lauderdale is because I knew that I would still have amazing access to Miami. Miami doesn't go away from me. I have family in Miami. I do business in Miami. I love it. I go down there frequently. But now I always tell people it's like, you know, an ex that I love and I'm still friendly with, but I just can't live with you anymore. So it's kind of like that type of situation. So I still go to Miami quite a bit. I love it. I go down for, you know, I recently went to the Lady Gaga concert and we took the Bright Line, which is my first time, and I absolutely loved it. It was super convenient, has great accessibility. It was easy to park at the Fort Lauderdale station, take the train down, see the show in beautiful, bright downtown Miami, which I love, and then fall asleep on the train back. It was quite a unique experience. Still have access to Wynwood, to tons of restaurants, shows at the Adrian Arch Center. There's just so much in Miami, and that doesn't go away. So that's the huge benefit, well, a huge benefit for me, and could be a huge benefit for you if you're considering Fort Lauderdale, that Miami is still there. I sell to clients all the time. I have a client that relocated from Chicago, and they love going to Miami for all kinds of different things. They went to Art Basel, they came with us to Lady Gaga, and they go down all the time for different things. And they prefer living in Oakland Park, but they're able to get to Miami pretty easily. And that's one of the things that we love, that we still have that access. So there's another thing that actually surprised me after we moved that I certainly did not expect. And one of those things is actually how much it can feel like a community here. So a lot of it obviously stems from the fact that, you know, I'm really connected to Wilton Manors and to the LGBT plus community. But even beyond that, it can kind of feel a little bit like a small town in Fort Lauderdale. And I really love that. And although I had that in Miami, more and more over the years, it started to go away because just the volume of people. It would happen all the time where I would, you know, again, I used to walk down Lincoln Road and I used to like run into friends and so many people that were in Miami all the time that I just did not have that experience. Totally different in Fort Lauderdale. It happens to me all the time, all over town. You know, if I go to a restaurant, I kind of run into clients or I run into a friend. It just happens all the time. And it happens really, again, all over town. Las Olas, different restaurants on Federal Highway. It happens on Wilton Drive all the time. It happens at the supermarket. I just love that about living in Fort Lauderdale. And I had that in Miami and I missed it. And that was kind of like one of the really nice, pleasant surprises of kind of moving back here, was seeing how much of a community feel there was here. And I really, really enjoyed that. And also because of that community feel, it's allowed me to make more friends and make more connections. Because what started to happen, kind of a prime example, is Starbucks. I love Starbucks, and we go there every single day after the gym, and we just kept seeing the same people and keep seeing the same people. And then we kind of became friendly, and I actually asked them the other day, hey, do you guys want to like maybe grab some dinner sometime? And they were open to that. And that was someone that we didn't even really know. We just kind of met them at Starbucks from going there all the time. So, you know, we didn't really have that in Miami. We lived in Miami Shores, and yes, we were friendly with some people and some of our neighbors. And we would go to, you know, certain spots all the time, but we didn't really see the same people all the time. And that's kind of the beauty of living in this area, is you do see people all the time, and then you make connections, and it's great to kind of network. So it's kind of like a really great thing to kind of have that. It's not a small town, but it does have a little bit of a small town feel in kind of a really nice way to kind of make new friends. So, you know, obviously I still love Miami in a lot of different ways. I do miss some of the things, like obviously the energy is always great in Miami. Miami has a lot of diversity in terms of like, not just Latin America, but just people really from everywhere. You know, I've met like French people, Italian people, I've met people from Africa, I've met just really all across the globe, because it is really an international spot. So I do miss things like that about Miami, but what I don't miss is I don't miss kind of getting lost in the shuffle. Like I mentioned before, I love the community feel of Fort Lauderdale. I certainly don't miss that nonstop crazy traffic. I was just in Miami the other day and I had to get from point A to point B, and I thought, okay, this will be a 10-minute drive. Ended up being 30 minutes. So I don't miss that, because it's one thing to deal with that on like an off day or two versus having to deal with that on a daily basis. I'm definitely not cool with that. I miss the architecture in Miami. Miami definitely has a lot of architectural value, not just with high rises. I mean, obviously, like a lot of the buildings in Miami are beautiful, but I miss the Art Deco district in Miami Beach. I miss the beautiful Mediterranean architecture of Coral Gables. I miss the beautiful architecture also of Miami Shores. And you know, there's just a lot of interesting structures in Miami. Fort Lauderdale does not offer that same type of details in terms of architecture, although we do have beautiful homes here. It's a little bit different. So I do kind of miss those things about Miami, but again, I can always go back to it, but it's just something that I miss. So what do I really love about Fort Lauderdale? I love that there's a little bit less traffic. I love the community feel of Fort Lauderdale. I love the fact that doing daily errands is much easier, getting around, getting to the mall, getting to the supermarket, the pharmacy. If I have to run down to Target, it's not going to take me half the day. So those things are definitely much, much better. I love the fact that Fort Lauderdale can still feel like a little bit of a big city, that we have entertainment, that we have a downtown, that we have walkability, that we have arts and culture here as well. We have museums, we have some shows, and so we're not lacking in that department. So it's something that is kind of still a great thing, and still kind of feel like a kind of a major city. And in Fort Lauderdale, we still have access to a lot of great things. We have a major airport. We have a seaport, which is one of the largest seaports in the world. So we still have access to a lot here, but it can kind of still feel like there's, you know, some connectivity without the craziness of Miami. And I always tell people that Fort Lauderdale can sometimes feel a little bit like Miami, a little bit different, but just with the sting taken out. So remember at the beginning of the video that I mentioned a hidden gem. So one thing I wanted to mention is actually the water taxi. So the water taxi kind of goes through Las Olas area, downtown Fort Lauderdale, and it goes all the way through the New River. So it's something really great and unique that we have here in Fort Lauderdale. They actually don't have that in Miami. So it's really enjoyable. You can take it right in downtown and kind of ride around and see all the buildings and kind of get a different perspective of Fort Lauderdale. Of course, Miami has beautiful Biscayne Bay, which is unmatched. We do have the water taxi here, which I think is kind of very special. If this is your first time on the channel and you want to know everything about living in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and the surrounding cities, then subscribe below so you can be the first to know about our current market in Fort Lauderdale. My name is Hector Valdez. I'm born, raised, and have lived in South Florida my entire life. My team and I love helping people make their move to Fort Lauderdale, whether it's 9 days or 9 months. Feel free to reach out. Our contact information is in the description, and we'd be happy to help you make a smooth move to Fort Lauderdale. See you in the next video.